I've been around Microsoft since I was a teenager, I think. I remember when Microsoft was still a 200 people company. I was born in the Soviet Union, so I remember going to their offices as they were opening in Moscow, in Kiev, and then Almaty. So did a lot of that, and then Eastern Europe later. And I didn't start with software asset management. I was actually promoting Windows Server. I was one of the first evangelizers of Windows Server. I really loved the product. I had it on my own computer. It could barely work on 16 megabyte memory. At some point, Microsoft actually introduced me to software asset management. It was 2003. And since then, I continued working alongside Microsoft. Funny enough, fun fact, almost forgotten. I taught Microsoft's own employees their own licensing at some point. They paid for it. It's good business.
Doesn't surprise me.
Yeah. And on and off, I had various businesses around this area. With a little break, when I moved to the UK, I went to work for a local company for a few years just to learn the market, get to know people, shake hands, establish connections. And then 4 years ago, I restarted the business under my old brand, SAMexpert. But this time, we decided not to be Microsoft partners. We decided strictly we don't sell anything. We take the customer side strictly, and we just take care of the costs, negotiations, commitment management, contractual management, all kinds of Microsoft-related stuff, very focused on Microsoft. Talking about this slide, the reason why we put this together is to tell the story of how even our business that we restarted in 2021 had to adapt to the changes in the Microsoft licensing and cloud ecosystem. You can see that even in 2022, the percentage of Microsoft 365, which is also a cloud product, so it's not Azure, but it's a cloud product. And Azure, it was quite high enough at the time. But also you can notice that the share of on-premise software was pretty big still. We still needed to manage it. We still needed to reduce cost and optimize server infrastructure, and it did bring benefits. We always forget in the FinOps and software asset management world that there aren't only cloud and licensing costs, but there's also hardware, electricity, and support. On-premise played a big part in the overall picture. In the last 3 years, we're still adapting. We had to turn this business in a different direction because, strictly speaking, nobody cares about on-premise anymore. The share of on-premise software is diminishing not only because of the overall move to the cloud. It's also because how Microsoft now positions those products. Procurement and CIOs, CFOs, they only look at those numbers once in 3 or 5 years when they renew their agreement. Azure agreement, CSP, enterprise agreement. I'm sorry, I can't avoid completely dropping the acronyms there because that is something that you still need to work with. Microsoft agreements have their timeframes. If you only deal with that every 3 years, this could be a bit of a shock. Microsoft consistently evolves. They always introduce changes. And interestingly, if previously the focus was mostly in the licensing changes, new products released, licenses change. Now, if you look at the licensing updates, they're tiny. Microsoft product terms, their official website, every month they publish updates. Most of the updates, we updated terms for AI. We brought one product from one channel to another channel. If you look at only those updates, there's nothing happening from that point of view. It always seems like licensing is static, except for at the end of 2024, Microsoft released Windows Server 2025 and System Center 2025. What's going on really is going on in the background. It's the change of the overall approach to how Microsoft wants to take customers' money. It's all going towards consumption and consumption commitments, pay-as-you-go licensing. For many mature procurement and license managers, these concepts are new. Even experts are barely grasping this new reality. And people on the end client side, I feel sorry for them. And the other thing that happened to Microsoft licensing is not only the shift to the cloud, it's not only moved to consumption and pay-as-you-go models. It's also that now it's almost upside down. We used to talk about licenses. The key question, even 3 years ago, was how many licenses do I need to build this, to deploy these databases, to deploy this cloud? You could look up those answers if you knew where to look. And by the way, all the information was public and very clear. Despite that people say it wasn't clear, it was clear. You just need maybe to read it 2-3 times and you'll understand it. You could calculate those numbers. because the formulas were clear and we were talking about specific products. We found ourselves right now in the second quarter of 2025 in a situation when the key question right now is not how many licenses I need. The question is rather what licenses and what product bundles and what connections between bundles do I now need to enable a specific feature. For example, I want to publish Power BI dashboards. What do I need? Then you look at the modern day Power BI licensing, and I'll mention it again. And you understand that you have a portion that is pure licenses and the massive chunk that is now an Azure consumption, which is Microsoft Fabric. It wasn't the case up until 2024 when Microsoft changed that. Many companies used Skype phones, especially those that operate internationally. It was a very easy to use service. Now, if you want to change to Teams phone, which is, by the way, if you look at the Teams telephony in 2025 on this graph, the yellow piece of the pie, that was a big surprise, by the way, to me to see how much Teams-based telephony is in the budgets right now. This graph is an average across all our clients from the last 12 months. All the clients we served, these percentages represent what we have to deal with. Teams-based telephony is huge. That is a big chunk. You may think, okay, it's relatively small. In absolute numbers, it's pretty big. So if you want to implement that, it's also not a simple answer. You have to use this, you have to use that. That is a consumption, there's a calling plan. There are licenses that are per user. There may be licenses that require Azure resources that you manage completely differently. And I guess the biggest challenge right now, I know. The biggest challenge right now is that the management of all this is also upside down. Let's go even further into history, 2018, 2019, when Office 365 was only just introduced to the market. We're based in the UK, you're based in the UK as far as I remember. I don't know if you're aware, there's a government contract that Microsoft signs with the government, with the UK government, with the Crown, as we call it. And the massive shift to Microsoft 365 happened around 2018. In 2015, it was already being implemented, but in 2018, it was a key element of the cloud strategy of the government. Still, those were countable licenses. Procurement could prepare the numbers with the help of experts to bring them to the negotiation table, and everybody knew what they're paying for. They were paying for specific quantities. There was predictable growth. There wasn't that much of the Azure consumption in 2018, 2019. Nowadays, the role of procurement is severely curtailed. They have no control anymore. I'll give you a very simple example. If I give my son £100, instead of giving him £100, if I order lunches, school lunches for him up front, this is the old procurement role. I know exactly what lunches I order. I know exactly how much they cost. I know exactly when they'll be served. And I know he's sorted. Still, I control the budget in this case. What is an Azure consumption commitment? Is me giving my son £100 for, say, 2 weeks, £10 a day. Then lunches are expensive these days. And that's why my role of procurement stops. So he negotiates the sum with me with the promise that is for his lunches. And what he can then do, he can either spend them cleverly on the lunches, but again, I have no control of what he buys, or he can just go to a nightclub and spend it on the night out experience. Fortunately, he's only 5 years old. He doesn't know what a night out experience is. But that would have been a financial and nutritional disaster if he did that. That is exactly what's happening. The role of procurement stops when that £100 is given to actually young people. Yeah.
Does it go even further than that, Alex? Because I guess when I think about your example, the pay-as-you-go cloud, I guess, is a bit like procurement giving them a credit card and saying only spend £100, but it's actually got an unlimited limit on it, hasn't it?
Yes, and on the other hand, the focus also shifted from managing costs to managing commitments. Because you're not only watching when you go into the overages, but you also need to meet the promises you made to Microsoft, Google, Amazon, whichever cloud platform or platforms you use. And if you don't meet that commitment, you lose your discounts. And they have also clever traps on how to make you spend more and more. And I probably should go on the tangent and actually explain what's happening with Microsoft Azure consumption commitments. So they give you incentives and benefits for meeting the consumption target in a year, which you can then get. But they don't count towards your next year's commitment because they're free. They don't count towards your next year's commitments. So you end up consuming more and more. And by the end of the contract, not many organizations can drop that because they're already used to using this. It's already part of their business. That then causes the natural growth of the Azure budget. It's amazing what's going on. If somebody asked me, what is one takeaway from all this, what's happening? It's FinOps. You can call it FinOps. You can call it cloud unit economics, as Gartner calls it, because FinOps is not really about cloud economics. It's a bigger practice, and it's closer to DevOps. But anyway, these words are used interchangeably, as you know it, these days. And the old ways of procuring, all they achieve these days is an initial discount. And then you need to implement real-time control of your budgets. Otherwise, you're just licking your dollars and pounds and euros and whatever other currency you use, unfortunately. And another point I want to make at the very beginning before we continue this conversation, I'm almost finished here, is that when you look at the growth of Azure and the diminishing role of on-premises software, the on-premises software didn't disappear. But right now, one of the key products, one of the key flagship scorecard items for which Microsoft sales reps are rewarded handsomely internally, they get bonuses for it, is SQL Server with Azure Arc, which can be deployed on premises. It can still exist and run on your premises. And it's heavily discounted at the moment. I can't disclose the numbers. In many cases, they're NDA, behind NDAs. But for large corporations, they can be eye-watering discounts, ridiculous discounts. The money for that SQL Server goes into the Azure pocket because it's a SQL with Azure Arc. And Windows Server 2025, the uptake is much slower than with SQL, and I'm not sure what's going to happen with it. To be honest, I think it's also a very good initiative for those who can manage their costs and their IT infrastructure properly. Windows Server 2025 also introduced that model with Azure Arc, which also moves on premises and maybe hosted on dedicated hardware somewhere in a data center service into the Azure consumption bucket. Here's probably the last bit that I want to add here to draw the picture. For those who are maybe not aware, effectively right now, Microsoft is split in two monetary streams. Traditional licensing agreements, old and new, and whatever you spend in the cloud, which goes through this Microsoft Azure consumption commitments. Things are gradually being taken by Microsoft from the old agreement infrastructure, even new agreements, and move towards Azure consumption. And this tendency will continue.
How do you think that affects what this graph would look like in a couple of years' time then, Alex, based on what you've just said? I guess you're seeing that the blue and the red ones get bigger.
AI will grow, certainly. It's not growing as fast as Microsoft is saying. And you can see, I'm famous for bashing Microsoft, but I think they're right now trying to muddy the numbers to hide the actual truth about the AI uptake. It's not that fantastic, but it's growing. It's not diminishing. It's not static. So that share will grow. On-premises software will at some point reach 1 or 2%. There are still industries where on-premises is very important. For example, manufacturing. You can do nothing with servers at factories because they must be there. They must be real time. They control the production lines. They control local operations that can't survive any disruptions. So they just must be on-premise.
So do you think with the on-premise bit, what you're saying about Arc, do you think you'll see as a trend more of that moving to be Azure and more, even other vendors, they'll follow similar models where they can use an Arc-like concept to get their software to be consumption type cloud rather than just traditional on-prem?
Yes. Then Power Platform, which is another consumption-based resource. It's very tiny on our graph. And I'm asking myself why. Because Microsoft, if you look at their revenue reports, they actually reported that Power Platform is 18% of their income. We're not seeing it. So I wonder how. Maybe it's our market segment that we work with, but we work with different industries. We're not in a particular niche in that regard. So I would expect that And Cloud Platform includes Dynamics 365, and if somebody knows what I'm talking about, CRM, Microsoft CRM and Sales Platform. That will be a big chunk. All in all, if you look at Power Platform, telephony, Microsoft 365, and Azure, and AI, it's all consumption-based. It's all in the FinOps area. And from the tooling standpoint, and as far as I understand, so correct me if I make a mistake here, you have a tool. From the tooling standpoint now, this all becomes a part of FinOps, not just the cloud side, but everything. Because one of the ways to manage Microsoft 365 costs is to consistently look after usage and adjust accordingly, as much as your agreements allow.
So how do you see the relationship between procurement people and FinOps people working? I guess from what you've described so far, you would see that as being a bigger trend in the future than what it is now.
It's already evolving, and the clever interplay between various teams. And I want to bring back the old software asset management teams here as well, for the reasons that many organizations have history and they have historic licenses. And one of the ways to reduce costs in the cloud, the Microsoft Cloud in particular, is bring your own license. These departments need to cooperate. Yes, the role of procurement is much less influential than it used to be. But I don't want to say that procurement plays zero role here. It would be completely wrong. This is what we do. We also help procurement to negotiate agreements. The way they should operate, and the way they already operate in companies that learn from their mistakes, is FinOps teams and software asset management teams are enablers for the negotiations. When costs are managed, when costs are monitored, and when they have experience and tools to project potential and model potential consumption, then they can be more spot on their commitments. Not overcommit, not undercommit, or commit for more but use that as a leverage in the negotiation. Microsoft also evolves. They have very clever sales teams, and all they do is they sell on a daily basis. So they learn. They immediately sniff if you come to a negotiation unprepared. And usually they know about your infrastructure more, not everything, that's a myth that they know everything, but they know more than the majority of the end clients. And they know what to sell. They know how, based on that information that they have. So FinOps teams have two roles here, effectively. Obviously, control the costs. Control the costs between renewal dates, during the renewal term. And potentially, I don't think report to procurement, probably to CFO, if you think about a good structure. But also prepare the procurement teams, and I'm talking about at least 6 months up front, empower them with the numbers, empower them with trends, with where this is all going, and give procurement the tools to have the upper hand at the negotiation table.
Do you think there's a bit missing in this as well, though? Because I think the way we describe the procurement activities are always negotiating hard with Microsoft or a vendor to get a good deal is the historical way it's worked. But I wonder if, as part of FinOps, procurement need to look the other way, and it's not just the FinOps team giving procurement the information, but almost the procurement team giving FinOps teams accountability, where they challenge back and say, get things efficient, get rid of waste. You're the one who has to put me in a good position to negotiate, not just give me the information. Because I think that's a big theme we see a lot of customers who are struggling, is the lack of accountability, where teams just build stuff and don't worry about the costs of it. And then the FinOps team are trying to mop up the mess. But the accountability gap in the culture of the company is really where nobody's really responsible for the costs. And I wonder if the procurement team need to make the rest of the team, they're the people who say we have to be efficient so that we can negotiate harder.
That requires the procurement teams to transform into more financial controlling teams. Because the role of procurement, the traditional role of procurement is just to sign a deal and then disappear.
Yeah.
And yes, they need to evolve. And actually, I know some people that are procurement heads who have been pretty active during the previous years in the ITAM and SAM areas, although they're procurement people. They're now building such practices as you just described in their organizations where they monitor and influence the way the money is spent. Without that, you lose control. You really just give them a purchasing card and a corporate card, and then they go on a spending spree. This is what's happening. And one of the biggest evils, by the way, is marketplace. You can calculate potentially your required Azure resources for the next, I wouldn't say 3 years, that's difficult, for the next quarter, 2 quarters, maybe a year. But marketplace purchases are almost, I wouldn't call it shadow IT because you can see them, but they're the hardest to control because the demand for those marketplace third-party products can arise at any point in time and can be initiated by top-level management, IT people. The problem is that still, and by the way, I don't think it's going to change. The traditional software asset management people and now FinOps are seen as a necessary evil by IT because IT itself is not metered on savings. IT is metered on the uptime, on the latency, on the availability of the resources. I used to run a business. I used to be a serial entrepreneur. I had a separate business that was a system integration and support business. And the most frequently asked questions we got in our support team was, why is my Excel not loading fast? So that is what IT is responsible for. The cost considerations for the IT is not even on the top 10 priority list. That requires the entire organization to review its IT spending policies and potentially put some of the accountability on IT. However, they need to solve this difficult priority puzzle where latency and speed and availability must still be at the top of the priority list.
I think it's interesting actually that because we often discuss whether projects have operational cost as a non-functional requirement. You have non-functional requirements for all the other things that you mentioned there, but it's quite unusual to see day-to-day running cost being a non-functional requirement.
We have to adapt. You know what? I'm looking at this graph and I'm thinking, are we getting obsolete? We're not, but I can't help waking up at 3 a.m. with that thought. The old approaches are obsolete. That's 100%.
Yeah.
We need to adapt. Procurement needs to adapt. CFOs actually don't need to adapt because they have other people to do it for them. I can see how experts are retiring one after another, especially at my age and older, and just people decide that they can't survive in this changed world. You either control it or you're just leaking the money. I can put it even anyhow clearer.
Mm. So what's some of the best strategies then for people in the audience who feel the same pain that we're describing here? What do you think are some of the best strategies to start tackling that problem?
First and foremost, and I know it's an old mantra that everybody's heard hundreds of times, you need visibility. You need complete visibility, and you need a translation layer, some kind of set of tools that will take millions and millions of Azure consumption records. Excel fails. Excel can't load them. It's huge. And translate them into something that you can skim through quickly. These days, we want quick solutions, but still giving you 100% visibility of what's going on. Trends, pockets, cost centers, tags. The tagging in FinOps is a very important practice. You can't just wing it anymore without that translation layer, without that tooling, without that consolidated data. That is the first thing. The other thing, which is also nothing new, is a fool with a tool is still a fool. We need somebody to interpret it.
Yeah.
But not only interpret it, we need somebody in those organizations, so maybe outsourced, to look at those numbers from the tool, make sense of them, and be able to explain what happened and what to do. Fortunately, that expertise is growing, and I would probably be spot on if I say there are already hundreds of people in the world, not thousands, that are capable of doing that. An organization that spends 7 figures on the cloud can't avoid having somebody almost full-time with a tool. So these are the first steps, the foundation. And the next step is what I just discussed. We need to start reassessing the role of procurement in the cloud world, as you just suggested, by the way, from simply deal makers to cost controllers. It's nothing new, by the way. The PC's purchasing cards and corporate cards existed since forever, actually, since I think plastic was introduced, and even before that. I heard stories when those old policies, instead of writing something new, those old policies surrounding corporate purchasing cards were adapted to build cloud-centric cost control policies. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. You just need to modernize it. What I'm sharing right now is based on my conversations with actually UK-based procurement teams that are successful, at least in the first stages of cost management. These ideas are they're not public yet. It's not like a worldwide knowledge yet, but they're floating.
We've got a question from one of our friends, Robin, who's based out of, I think Robin's in Gothenburg, if I remember right. So Robin does a lot of public sector work out in Sweden, and he was asking for advice around state agencies and government. His questions, we've got an IT budget set the previous year, and pay-as-you-go is not a viable financing option if you've got that preset budget. I guess he's really asking for how you would find that balance between, I've got a preset budget, but I need to do some consumption-based spend on cloud to deliver a project. How do you marry that up? And I guess that comes a little bit back to the core problem there with the procurement about how do we make sure we spend what we said we were going to spend and spend it on the things that we said we were going to spend it on.
I don't have the exact list in my head right now. On some of the items, Microsoft still offers two options. Either pay-as-you-go, or if you can estimate your consumption, if you can estimate your potential demand, you'll probably overestimate. That's how those tariffs work. But you can put that cap by just procuring that amount. But on the other hand, if you think about it, if we're talking about agentic AI, for example, and if you buy an X amount of messages, an X amount of actions that your AI agents can take, then there's a risk of, so you control the ceiling because you prepaid for a certain amount. Imagine if that is a key part of your business and it just stops working, because that's how it works. It stops working. It doesn't charge you for overages unless you allow it to, unless you also have a pay-as-you-go option that starts working afterwards. And that is the problem. You're not paying for 10,000 licenses for your laptops anymore, which you can count what your headcount is, what it will be. You're dealing with virtually unknown entities, AI agents. Even storage, you can think we can predict how much storage we need, when the reality is it's very difficult. You have to have a very good control. And on some of the things, which was, by the way, came as a massive surprise to us, because we also consume cloud, is none of the cloud platforms allows you to set a budget stop. So in the cloud, that doesn't work. You can't say, stop me from using this resource, this Lambda function in AWS, this data transfer in Azure. It can alert you. You can get an alert when it comes to a certain threshold. And by the way, as one of the quick wins, when you're just building that practice, set up alerts on everything that is pay-as-you-go, on everything that cannot be stopped by the means available in the cloud. You need to at least have a good heads up. At 50%, at 70%, 80%, you need that kind of alerting, whether from a third-party tool or from the built-in functions. It depends on the platforms you use. The unfortunate reality, and I understand the government concerns, and I worked with the public sector, you just have no tools. There's no stop button. That stop button must be internal. There's no choice. I'm sorry. It's a dead end.
So
I don't know, Michael, if you have a recipe, I don't. I don't want to dance around this. It's your internal process. Microsoft, AWS, Google, Oracle, Kyndryl, I can drop in many more names. They are, first of all, not interested in you stopping spending money with them. Why would they? And on the other hand, they don't want to be responsible for disrupting your business operations when your costs run out of control. They have no incentive to stop you, to give you that ceiling you can't break.
We've done some really interesting stuff with that, actually, Alexander. Every bit of that you've touched on is right. Microsoft aren't interested. They think what's the service interruption if we just automatically do it? So I think it's a design problem here, where you need to look at the right things that you build and where's appropriate and not appropriate to stop stuff if things are going off the rails. And I think that it comes back to that non-functional requirements piece, I think, where that's not really part of the project deliverable, so it doesn't make people think about what should we do in that scenario. We've done a couple of things with customers where we do like circuit breaker patterns. A classic example we've seen recently has been things like consumption functions and consumption logic apps, where people have built a solution that they expect to cost a couple of pounds a day, and then the third party who submits data to it had a bug, and they submitted a million times the amount of data they normally submit. It. The cloud just grows because that's what the cloud does, and it scales up and processes it automatically because it's consumption. For some solutions, that's exactly what you want to happen. In other solutions, you go, that's exactly what we don't want to happen. The out-of-the-box stuff doesn't do it. But I think the big challenge is always you start having an issue, but you're dependent on the cost data that isn't immediately available. So you don't necessarily know you've got a problem till 24 hours later. But we've done stuff with customers where you have to use the metrics of the resources. So you could say a good example with a function app is, I only expect this function app to run 1 million times in a day. And if it runs more than that, then I'll just turn it off and disable it, as a good example. So I think that there are design ways, but it's too complicated is the top and bottom of it, isn't it? And people don't think about it because it's not the minimum viable product that projects have to deliver to enable users, which is what we think about the digital transformation journey. It's all about how do we transform the business with new IT that enables users to do things we need them to do. And it isn't till later we worry about how do we make this solution sustainable. And I think that's the underlying problem that I think leads to all the discussions that we have now about cost controls and cost management. What do you think are the big things that your company will be doing over the next year that will make a difference for customers with these kind of problems? Is there any new emerging areas that you're really taking an interest in that you think customers are going to be challenged with? I guess AI cost management is probably one of them.
I can list the top 3 very easily. AI cost management, products with Azure Arc, SQL Server, Windows Server, very interesting. Yeah. We need to start looking after them. And we also have our own, what I call them tool replacers. When big tools aren't yet catching up, we have our own solutions for that. Bring your own license is still a big thing. Azure hybrid use benefit is still underrated or just misused, to be honest. Power BI and Fabric is a big topic. Agreements are being renewed right now, and organizations must move to Fabric. And AI, Copilots, plural.
Which one of those topics is the one that excites you the most?
I wouldn't say any of them in particular. What excites me the most right now is the shift of our company as well from purely negotiation help, because we also evolve with procurement, more towards providing managed services to help them control the costs and hit the commitment, but cleverly.
Yeah, so you see that as traditionally it's maybe more of a one-off exercise during a negotiation to being an ongoing exercise. Yeah, I think we see a lot of companies seeing that as a general thing anyway. So it's interesting that you also see it when you're focusing a bit more around licensing and cost as well. It's quite interesting. So do you think that'll be how SAMexpert grows, where you'll have more people helping customers with these managed services, ideas around cost management and procurement together?
For us, it's not a question of whether we want it. It's a survival question.
Yeah, got you.
We really have no choice.
Obviously, you're one of the experts in the field, but what does the rest of your team do to keep up to speed? And what do you do to keep up to speed to be an expert in this? Because I feel like lots of things are changing all the time, and it's not just keeping up to date with the licensing and the negotiation and the contract side of things, but you also have to keep up with the technology bit. So how do you keep on top of that?
We have people looking after cloud exclusively. We have people looking after data analysts exclusively. 30% of the time they spend is on consistent learning and evolving and research. Even I, at some point, realized that if I spend less than an hour a day on learning and talking and asking questions, you very quickly get rusty.
Yeah.
The evolution of the cloud right now is faster than ever. I know hundreds of procurement professionals, and those who are real superstars, they also learn about it on a daily basis. Maybe not on a daily basis, but at least on a weekly basis. You can see that. If you follow them on LinkedIn, you can see what they talk about, what they post about. It's a survival question for the entire industry of people who've been previously looking after assets and asset costs. Now they need to adapt or they need to retire.
Yeah, yeah. Can I pick your brain a bit on some of the AI stuff that we've very briefly touched on? You were saying that you feel in the customers that you see, it's not growing as quickly as what you think the official story of how much it's grown. What do you think are the adoption blockers in management side of things that you think are holding people back on AI? I'm assuming there's got to be some of that to the equation, but it'd be good to get your take on if there's things you think that hold people back from using AI more.
You have a tiny layer of people in every organization that are enthusiastic, that want to use AI, that know how to use AI. And the rest of the people are sometimes given Copilot, for example, Copilot for Microsoft 365, and they have no idea how to use it. And they use it for only 5% of its promised capacity. I'll get to that. So thank you for opening that kind of worms. They use it for just meeting summaries, for which there's a cheaper plan. And with Copilot in particular, I don't want to talk about more sophisticated AI models, agentic AI that is gaining traction right now. Still very low in the overall budgets, a tiny bit. Talking about Copilot, which is the flagship product, Microsoft 365 Copilot, it actually doesn't work out of the box, as opposed to OpenAI, ChatGPT, or Google Gemini, or Claude. But there's a reason for that, and a very serious reason. Copilot was built with security in mind. There are still gaps, there are still holes for hackers, but overall, it's still more secure and protects your data better than any of the other third-party AIs, which just, God knows what they do with the data. Do you want to really feed them all your enterprise data? It's very difficult to control that. Due to those limitations, Microsoft is in a very difficult place balancing enterprise security and actually making the features work. If I'm completely blunt, the largest purchasers, I'm talking about tens of thousands of licenses per organization, were not executed on behalf of by the procurement. They were all parts of what we call golf course deals, when Microsoft would approach a CEO or any other C-level executive in a big organization, somewhere in the restaurant or on a golf course, and just say, if you don't buy this, you're going to be missing out. It's a FOMO purchase. Which were not justified. In our conversations, we're seeing the desire of those organizations to actually downsize those deployments because they still haven't figured out the usage. The highest adoption rate I've seen, and it was recent, and I was quite surprised, was 60%. That's great. Overall, it's 10 to 15. Now we're seeing 60% because they figured it out. They still figured it out. That is the biggest showstopper. They didn't realize the value.
With what you're saying there, then it's a slightly different angle to what I've thought about some of this before. But I guess the problem's really we're buying the technology, but we're not investing in the training for the users on actually what you can do with it. It's not just optimizing your spend on cloud. It's like actually, if you buy a car, if you don't teach someone to pass the driving test, you've wasted your money.
You just said the key word, optimize. And obviously we say we sell savings, but not everybody needs savings. What organizations really need is to get the bang for the buck, or what we call now is value realization.
Yeah.
And it's a multifaceted tool. And by the way, this is why SAMexpert, we started partnering with implementation companies as well, somebody who's very proficient in AI or in Dynamics 365, because some of our clients don't want to reduce the costs. They want to justify the budgets.
Yeah. And I think that's just as important, really, isn't it? It's like, you might have made a big investment on something, but rather than just ditch it, let's make sure we get the value from it. The value could be way bigger than the cost saving if you just canned an entire project, couldn't it?
If you know how to use AI, I'll disclose the number we calculated. So our ROI on using different AI tools is 200 to 1. If you know how to use it, if you have an idea about why you're spending this money, you have scenarios, you have job descriptions, you have all the infrastructure in place for the AI. Not just buy a new tool and think that maybe one day it will make me money. I've never seen such ROIs in my life on anything else. 200 to 1. It's ridiculous. Still, large deployments are right now barely scratching the 1-to-1 barrier.
Yeah. It's quite interesting, isn't it? So it's almost like it's not just about investing in trimming the bill. It's investing in making sure you're training people to use what you've bought.
Yes. Yeah. I can't disagree with that.
Alex, I've really enjoyed this conversation, actually. It's been really fascinating listening to your journey and some of your experiences. I'm hoping everybody's got a lot out of this session that they've enjoyed. So I think we'll wrap up there, Alexander. I've really enjoyed meeting you today, and thank you very much for joining us. And I'd love to collaborate some more with you so we can maybe chat about maybe some future webinars. And if you want us to come on your channel and talk about any topics at some point, we'd be happy to do that as well.
Fantastic. Yes, let's discuss that as well. I'd like to know more about your technology.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you very much for your time. And we hope everybody in the audience has a fantastic week, and we'll have the recording out in the next day or so.